Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. John Herron. I am the Executive Director of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to welcome you to our event tonight. We have a special presentation capping what has been an important several weeks in our community, in which we have been both sobered and inspired by the work of Andre Perry. Before we begin, let me offer a special thank you to our longtime partner and co-presenter of this event, the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, Leah McIntosh and Sherman Whites in particular. The generosity of the foundation makes all of the library's special programming possible to begin with. And Leah and Sherman were essential in helping arrange not only today's event, but also a series of thought-provoking community conversations that all led into tonight. One of the things that our library does best, holding to our core mission, is to engage our community. We've always sought to address our most pressing civic and social issues, including race and inequality. We have increased those efforts recently as our nation has tried to reckon with our history of injustice. Dr. Perry and his book certainly add to that dialogue. With the support of the library's Katie Stover, the Director of Reader Services, Dr. Perry took part in 5 virtual book discussions with Kansas City audiences over 10 days, all moderated by Cedric Dedman, who oversees the Mid-America Regional Council's KC Degrees program. The response of our community was strong, and it was all very gratifying. Dr. Perry, a nationally renowned commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, will dig further into his book tonight. His work looks at the long-time devaluation of Black lives and Black communities, homes, family structures, businesses, and schools, and what our country can gain by bringing an end to that inequality. Andre is a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., as well as a scholar in residence at American University. Dr. Perry is also a regular contributor to MSNBC and a columnist for the Hetchinger Report, a pioneering nonprofit outlet focused on education. Joining him in this discussion is Emmet Pierson Jr., President and CEO of the nonprofit Community Builders of Kansas City. It is our community's largest urban core developer, working to benefit what has been our community's most disadvantaged neighborhoods. Emmet has served as the Director of Real Estate for Community Development Corporation and Senior Advisor for the Housing and Economic Development Financial Corporation of Kansas City. Andre and Emmet, I want to thank you for being here. I'd now like to turn our attention to Sherman Whites from the Kauffman Foundation to lead us through the rest of this evening.
Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to take a minute to say thank you to each of you who decided to share your dinner hour with us. We will do our best to make the discussion as vibrant as the ones held at your dining room table. This event and others similar to it underscore the Kauffman Foundation's goals to advance inclusive prosperity in the Kansas City region. That is, ensuring that individuals who have faced persistent inequities due to race and/or socioeconomic factors are actually building wealth and have a good quality of life. Without further ado, I'd like to take a minute to introduce tonight's moderator, Mr. Emmet Pierson, President and CEO of Community Builders KC. And Emmet is joined this evening by our special guest, who you just heard about, Dr. Andre Perry, Fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. Andre is also a scholar in residence at American University, is also an award-winning journalist, former dean in higher education, former K-12 educator, radio host, and in his spare time, he authored the book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in American Black Cities. I'm excited to listen in on this conversation. Mr. Pierson, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As Sherman said, I also would like to thank the Kauffman Foundation and the Kansas City Library for all that you do in this Kansas City community. And Dr. Perry, thank you so much for being on the Zoom. I would love to say, do this in person, and welcome to Kansas City, or welcome back to Kansas City. Just so you know, because I'm not seeing it right now, we sent a little care package, Sherman and I. I hear there's something about you seem to be some kind of Steelers fan. Well, in the care package was a Mahomes jersey, since he is the best quarterback in the league, and we are the world champs. But we'll get into that at a later date. We are here to talk about this best-selling, outstanding book that is riveting. And so with that, I want to jump right into it. I know you've had a long day. So again, thank you to you for taking the time to share, to inspire those that are on the call. And I'm excited. So with that, I'll turn it over to you for a couple of opening remarks and get it started. And then we'll get back into some good conversation.
Yes, Emmett, thank you. Thank you very much for your warm introduction. And I look forward to wearing the jersey when the Steelers go to the Super Bowl. But that's another, for another conversation. I also want to thank John Herron for your work in the libraries and Sherman Whites for being a consistent friend over time. We've been in this for quite a long time, so it's always good to reconnect. But I want to start off just with a story before I just go in a brief presentation. A lot of folks don't know that I actually dropped out of school in the 4th grade. I was, and you'll hear about this, I was informally adopted by an older woman who took in kids. And I was one of several, and when we would go to school, I would get teased a lot because we were poor, and poor kids tease poor kids like you wouldn't believe. And I emotionally, I just couldn't take it. And so I actually would leave my brothers and sisters and walk away from the school. This is 4th grade. And then I would walk to the library, the public library in the area. And I would walk in and I would find a corner and I would just read for the entire day. And then I would look at around 3 o'clock, I would leave, go back to the school, join my brothers and sisters. And I did that for quite a long time until I guess a truant officer, back in the day, we had truant officers, not actual police officers that did this kind of work. But the truant officer came to the house and said, "Hey, Andre's not coming to school." And Mom looked perplexed. She was just dumbfounded. And I told her what I was doing. I eventually had to repeat the 4th grade. She essentially homeschooled me for the rest of the year. And, but that library saved my life. It was a place where I would find peace. It was a place where I would read like crazy. I still say that period of my life contributed to where I am today, but the library saved my life. And so I just want to thank Kansas City Public Libraries for hosting me, Kauffman Foundation, everyone involved throughout this time, this day. It's been incredible, and I'm glad to close it out with a good event. But I'm actually just going to jump in, do a very quick overview of the research behind my book, Know Your Price. And let me, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I forgot to hit a button when I shared my screen. Share computer sound. Let's see here. Slideshow. Yes, worthy of investment, the devaluation of assets in Black communities. And of course, you can find all of this in my new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And you can get it wherever fine books are sold, but make sure you go to your local indie bookstore. At the Brookings Institution, I study Black majority cities and neighborhoods. Here are just the cities. There are more than 1,200 Black majority cities. There's obviously too many Black neighborhoods to put on a map. But my story starts here at home. This is 1320 Hill Avenue, Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. Wilkinsburg is a small Black municipality surrounded by Pittsburgh on 3 sides. And you can see here, the home is boarded up. The roof is bowed. It's been abandoned for at least 15 or 20 years, and it's in decay. It's you can pick up the home if you want it by agreeing to pay taxes to the municipality of Wilkinsburg. So it's essentially worth $0 at this point, but it's worth so much more to me. The reason why, this woman in the upper right-hand corner, her name is Elsie Boyd. I call her Mom. The story was told to me. There was a deal made between my maternal grandmother and Mom that she would take me in because my mother was very poor. She was probably abused during the time. She already had another son 2 years older than me. And so that deal was made, and I would go to the house when I was born. So a few days after I was born, I went to 1320 Hill Avenue. Now, as you can see, my brother came, but I wasn't the only, we weren't the only children to be raised by Elsie Boyd. She took in about a dozen to 15 kids for varying durations. Some would stay a few weeks, some would stay a few months. My brothers and I, we stayed until we graduated from high school. And so she saved my life. She was a matriarch, an amazing matriarch, an entrepreneur in the Black community. But I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why I do this work. This gentleman here is Floyd Criswell, my father. Now, one of the reasons why I had to be informally adopted by a Mom was that he was in and out of prison. He became a drug addict. At the time in Pittsburgh, there was, you started to see the social decline resulting from the departure of U.S. Steel. But he developed a drug habit, and he bounced between Pittsburgh and Detroit. He eventually went to prison in Detroit, Jackson State Penitentiary, where he was killed by another inmate. He was stabbed in the heart a day before his 28th birthday. Now, my book, I wanted to learn about him and where he lived. Excuse me. And so I looked at home prices and home conditions in neighborhoods in which he lived. And that is the anchor for the book, Know Your Price. Here on this chart, you can see that this chart examines home values by zip code. On that x-axis, that horizontal axis, is the percent of Black people in a particular zip code. And on the y-axis, as indicated by the prices on top of the bars, are the average listing price within those neighborhoods. So as you can see, homes in which the Black population, the share of the Black population is less than 1%, on average, they're priced at about $340,000. And as you increase in the percentage of Black people in a zip code, the home prices decline. And so in areas where the share of the Black population is 50% or higher, those homes are worth about half as much, about $184,000. Now, a lot of people will say that's because of education, that's because of crime. But those are things you can control for in a study. So that's exactly what we did. We looked at an absolute price difference, and we controlled for structural characteristics. So meaning we wanted to get an apples to apples comparison between homes of the same size, same number of bedrooms, same quality per square foot. But we also wanted to control for neighborhood amenities. So education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics, because we wanted to measure home prices in neighborhoods and isolate everything except race. And what we found pretty much astounds that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's $156 billion in lost equity. And this is happening all across the United States. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where devaluation is occurring. Wherever you're seeing a green circle, that's where homes in Black neighborhoods are actually priced higher than their white counterparts. Kansas City, so it's about a 20% difference, about $18,000 per home. And now just to put that into context, Lynchburg, Virginia, 81% difference. Rochester, New York, 65% difference. Jacksonville, 47. There are places, like I said, where the home prices are higher in Black neighborhoods. Nashville, for instance, plus 10%, Boston, plus 23. I always remind people Boston's no less racist than Lynchburg, but the home prices are higher in Black neighborhoods. But I'm just going to put quickly this $156 billion in perspective, because it's a big number. It would have financed more than 4.4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average cost of a four-year public education. It would have replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan nearly 3,000 times over. 156 billion is nearly all of the damage caused by Hurricane Katrina, and it's double the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. And the reason why I put that in there, my father, who was in and out of prison for his heroin addiction, would not probably been incarcerated or killed if he lived in areas in which home prices yielded the kind of equity that afforded families better schools, better infrastructure, better services. His addiction probably would not have been criminalized. He would have had more options to go to a drug treatment facility. I say all the time, certainly an inmate caused his death, but housing devaluation was an accomplice, without question. This is why I say there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. Too often, we lean on this white supremacist myth that states the conditions of Black neighborhoods and cities are a direct result of the people in them. We say it all starts at home, a subtle dig to say that people don't have home training, if you will. But we ignore the fact that the wealth disparities in this country are largely caused by policy. It was redlining, housing discrimination, racial housing covenants that sapped resources from Black neighborhoods. And even today in the book, you will read their struggles to get investment. I know Emmet will appreciate this. Many developers who are doing excellent work still struggle to get the financing to develop neighborhoods in ways that can uplift Black communities. And so for me, I want to address policy, not go down this endless rabbit hole of blaming people. It doesn't make any sense. Let's stop that. But I'm going to close out here, but I just want you to just view this one video of me testifying on Capitol Hill. This is Representative Al Green of Texas asking us, do we believe there's housing discrimination? Now, mind you, of all the areas we know that there's discrimination is housing. Lots of research, lots of history on that. Most of our time in housing, it was legal to segregate. So I just want you to listen to this brief exchange.
If you think Black people are being discriminated when their property is being appraised, would you kindly raise your hand? One person on the panel. If you think that, for fear that I'm not communicating well, if you think that Black people are not being discriminated against when their property is being appraised, if you think they're not being discriminated against, kindly raise your hand. Okay, hands now, we're getting some consternation, I see.
You know, the stakes are high. With this past election, we saw that people will vote for a racist, a sexist, someone who flies in the face of democratic conditions. There's a denial that racism exists. Now, I don't want to coddle racism whatsoever. That's not why I'm here. My goal is to work with the willing, to work with people who are trying to really change things. The evidence is absolutely clear. Race and racism is present in everyday society. And we can put our heads in the sand and deny that, or we can add value to communities that have been damaged by racist policies. And no, investing in Black neighborhoods and Black communities will not take away money from you. There's also this myth that if you help a neighbor, you're taking away from someone else. And the reality is we will build the pie, we will grow the pie, we'll expand the economy. We have yet to realize an economy that is inclusive. And so we should not bury our heads in the sand and say this isn't real. It doesn't make sense. The data's there. We need to address this boldly, and for the sake of democracy, address it appropriately. So Emmet, thank you for allowing me to say a few words, but I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Dr. Perry, absolutely. I think you set the tone, and on my notes that I made, I had a couple. I had 156 billion of devaluation or lost equity. I have 23% of decrease in value on the average. So I want to put a pin in those, and let's come back to that.
Yeah.
We touched on something that I think, given where we are as a country with the elections just having, you have a recurring theme in your book from the middle toward the end, where you really uplift our African-American women. And you do it on several levels. But I want to first of all talk about, in light of the fact of where we are as a country in this election, I probably need to take you to Vegas, because in your book, you foreshadowed a couple of things. You foreshadowed the success and the ability of Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom, and a woman that I think should be governor. And that woman really is responsible for, we think, and as we are seeing, as it's been called, or is going through the recount, Stacey Abrams. I don't think, one, the Democratic Party can underestimate their significant accomplishments in the state of Georgia. But you talk about their political power. You talk about how oftentimes in the healthcare industry, our Black women are not heard and valued there as well. So if you will, because I am a girl dad, I have two wonderful daughters. One is a senior at Howard University, so that's why I'm rocking the hat, that played soccer, so shout out to her. And another fantastic daughter at the University of Kentucky. So I am all about Black women. So just talk a little bit about just that aspect of your book, because it is so profound.
And people, when they read the book, this is not your typical, let's look at how bad Black people are doing type of analysis. I lift up the assets that we should be investing in. And I show that systemically, we are devaluing otherwise quality assets. So the housing piece is really a metaphor for so many other aspects of our life. And it turns out, after doing this analysis, that Black women are severely devalued, in that, educationally they're rising, family, they're pulling us together, politically making waves. In so many areas, Black women are changing the landscape of America, but they don't get the investment that's commensurate with that work. And so what I wanted to do, and by the way, a woman took me in my biological mother also gave me up. She needs to be commended for that, because it was teamwork. My biological mother wasn't absent. It was just determined that this woman would raise me. And so women raised my life. And when I got to college, I read the Moynihan report, that report in the 60s that set the tone that unmarried Black women actually caused poverty. And when I read it, I remember going, that made absolutely no sense to me. That clearly Patrick Moynihan did not have a Black woman friend, because that Black woman friend would have told him that he's completely off base. The idea that housing discrimination, education discrimination, job discrimination in the 60s, especially, come on, what's causing poverty? They blamed it on the marital status of Black, and pinning it on Black women, saying that Black families were unstable because they were headed by Black women. That just didn't sit well with me. So even from then, I wouldn't consider myself a policy person in undergrad. But then I got a sense that Black women were undervalued in policy. And so I really wanted to uplift the ways that Black women are powerful, and in a way to say we need to drive investment. So my book cover is a Black woman. People will see that throughout the text that I uplift Black women, but it's not done in a way that is, fake or fun. This is what the data show, and so I think it is a book that really is in sync with the times. That what a lot of the projections I have in there, they were easy projections to make, because Black women are doing it. They're just doing it. So yeah, good. I mean, your daughters are well represented, I think, for the future. Well positioned.
Well, and I'm going to kind of keep knitting the needle, if you will, for those who might not have had the opportunity to read your book. And so you also talk about the importance of Black women in education as well. And you really spent a significant amount of time outlining your time in New Orleans after Katrina. But I found it just such a shock as you laid out how Black women were so important. And growing up, I did not have a Black teacher until I was in college. Mm-hmm. So, and you kind of talk about how the success of the Black community, of Black students, therefore are tied to folk of color, but particularly African-American women. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I spent a good part of my life, 14 years of my life, in New Orleans, where I became a charter school leader, helped manage 4 charter schools in the city. And at the time, the University of New Orleans had 2 charter schools at the time, and we treated them as community schools. But after Hurricane Katrina, things changed, and you started to see New Orleans take on sort of that national leadership role in chartering, and it took on sort of that no excuses, break up the school district type of vibe. And along the way, I quickly noticed an erasure, a decline of Black women in the teaching profession. Now, as a researcher, I've always known that Black teachers add value academically. Performance is higher in terms of grade point average. You're more likely to go on to college when you have a Black teacher. Discipline outcomes are better with Black teachers. This overall expectations are higher. And so the idea that you would lose teachers during Katrina, or in the aftermath of Katrina. 10 years later, the Black teaching population went from 70% to 50% roughly. And that equated to about 4% of the total Black workforce, which is a large sum, in the grand scheme of things. And it was a large sum of the Black middle class. So we extracted wealth from New Orleans, Black families, in the name of improving educational outcomes at the end of the day. And so clearly one of the solutions that I pose is to invest in Black teachers. In Kansas City, I've seen the data that since charter schools landed in Kansas City, they're at about the halfway point now in terms of their share. The percent of Black teachers have declined by about 10% or more. And so for me, you can't have reforms that can't see Black women in the future. And that's what is essentially happening in education reform. It has happened. Now, charter management organizations and different groups have learned, they've changed the tune. Everybody's talking about diversifying now, but the damage was done. You can't have reforms that don't see Black people in the future, or that's particularly not focused in recruiting Black talent. Now, and I just want to be clear. I say this all the time. I want education reform. We need education reform. One of the things we absolutely need, we need to change a financing system that sees schools predominated by people of color get $23 billion less than their majority white peers. That's a structural issue that needs reforming. We need better recruitment process. We need ways to provide relief on student loans to people who are becoming teachers consistently. We need reforms, but the idea that you're going to punish Black people towards educational excellence, that we don't need that kind of reform. So, but again, that was an area where I wanted to, and I apologize, people will read, that I apologize for my actions and my role in that phenomenon. Throughout the book, I apologize to Black women in particular. But that was an area where I apologize because I fired people, and it was wrong. It was wrong. And I did not see the value. I did not, I acted inappropriately, and I need to own it. So I hope people read that book and learn something about reform, because again, we need reform, but we need to uplift and honor and value Black people in the process.
So you're making my job just so easy. So as we talk about education reform, there's a couple of things, and I want to get back to, because you only put it up on the slide for a hot second, and I needed to marinate for a little bit, and we'll come back to it. There is nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. I want to let that marinate just a little bit. But here in Kansas City, as we're talking about education, and in your book, you talk about in your chapter entitled "By the Block," you talk about how lack of investment. You talk about the use of incentives as well, and how they're used. You really talk about, and you highlight, I believe the gentleman's name is Mr. Rice, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Brian Rice.
Mr. Rice, how he is literally buying a block. And, at the end of the chapter, you really highlight what so many developers of color but especially in those underserved communities face. It's a devaluation of property. It's a cost versus value. So I want you to talk about one, as we are having robust conversation in Kansas City through our chamber, through our city council, our city government, and the use of incentives as it relates to how they have been used, in many views inequitable, particularly to the school district of Kansas, Missouri, which is primarily Black and brown. So I want you to talk about that. And then I also want you to come back to the conversation around devaluation of land, because I think Mr. Rice really exemplifies the challenges and the struggles of development in our Black communities.
Okay, good. I'm going to mix the order up a bit, and you'll see why.
Absolutely.
That the reason why many Black people take this approach of buying back the block, one, it's a tradition that goes back since we've been, we're not enslaved.
Yes.
That people want to claim land and develop it in a overall environment in which Black people are not welcome. So when you're talking about gaining customers and selling wares and starting businesses, you couldn't do that in the outside world in the past, and to a certain extent, you can't do it now as easily as your white counterparts. And so there's always been an effort to create commercial corridors or areas in which you buy up land and develop it in a way that addresses community needs. Now, in particular, in many parts of the country, home prices are so devalued that you can actually buy the block using friends and family dollars. And you know, Brian Rice, he bought it borrowing money from his friends and his family because the prices are so low. But it's another thing to develop the block. Now, he in his case, he couldn't get financing because appraisers essentially valued his property at $0, which makes absolutely no sense. It made no sense whatsoever. One, there's actually developments going on in the area. And so I'm like, what's up with that? Then two, it's land. I mean, the land alone, it's in an area not too far from downtown. It has all the assets. It used to be a booming area of town. It has all the bones. That should be considered a solid investment, but he's not getting the financing. And right now the appraisal industry is under fire for things just like that. But this goes to this incentive piece. The way to combat devaluation is by giving direct capital to individuals who need it in those areas.
Dr. Perry, say that again.
Yeah, we need to get direct capital to individuals in the areas that are affected by devaluation. But what we do is we do the exact opposite. We either give money, the investments towards brick and mortar, or for companies to come in. So we offer tax incentives for companies coming, all with the hopes that somehow this stuff trickles down to people. No, it doesn't take an economist or someone who's worked in the field very long to recognize that if you invest in brick and mortar, if you invest in things that eventually raise the price of property, and people can't keep pace in terms of their income, they're eventually going to get priced out, pushed out. That's why you always have to invest in people before place. You invest in place and not people. That's how you get gentrification. And so for me, what we need to incentivize is figuring out ways how to direct capital to low income renters to become homeowners, for people who own homes in devalued areas, giving them tax credits, because the loss of equity means they don't have the money to essentially do the repairs, to invest in a coffee shop maybe in the neighborhood. And so for me, we got to understand this principle of investing in people who are proximate to the problem, not creating investments for other people in hopes that their prosperity will trickle down to low income folks. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. And so we need to figure out ways to direct capital to the people who need it, people who are proximate to the problem.
I'm so glad you said that. And I would like to, as we are fast moving through time, I want to encourage our listeners to use the chat box to, in fact, ask questions. Dr. Perry, we're going to keep on going, but I want to take just a couple of questions because I don't want time to get away from us, and we haven't. I can sit here and talk to you all night long, but as I believe Sherman, Mr. Whites of Kaufman Foundation said, we're going to have you back. So,
okay,
but one question I think, and this is something that the community here in Kansas City, the underserved community here in Kansas City, really struggles with, and it says, Dr. Perry, can you speak to how the digital divide plays into all of this that we're talking about here?
Oh man, let me tell you, what COVID exposed is how inconsistent broadband access is throughout the country. You saw school districts all of a sudden finding ways to get students broadband. They're passing out laptop computers, which begs the question, why didn't they do that before? If these are tools you need, why didn't school districts do this before? But the reason is, one, school districts should not be providing these, what should be public utilities. That this is a public issue, a public utility issue. We need broadband. Everyone does, and right now it's too inconsistent between various neighborhoods. And so we need legislation in place so that school districts aren't the one having to pony up. With that said, I do believe when we're building new developments that we have to figure out ways to build in broadband, access to broadband in those developments. So if you build a new school, you build a new university building, you build a new library. We need to figure out to broaden access to broadband, because I'm not necessarily familiar with Kansas City, but in DC, I've seen the people parked outside of McDonald's. I've seen people parked outside of libraries trying to get Wi-Fi. And so that just shouldn't happen. And so we need we need legislation to provide greater accessibility to broadband, no question about it.
Yeah, Dr. Perry, I can tell you here in Kansas City, if a new affordable housing complex is constructed and they're using tax credits, then the state has a mandate and a requirement that broadband is in fact furnished to those residents. So Missouri is a little bit progressive, maybe not as much as DC on some things, but on this, we're there. As we keep moving through the conversation, you kind of talked about what leads to gentrification, and you give outstanding examples in the Shaw neighborhood in Washington, D.C., for example.
Yeah.
Here in Kansas City, we have an area here that is literally, it overlooks downtown and our Hospital Hill and our, all of those areas which we all would love to live in. And we are beginning to struggle with that as a city and as a community. So enlighten us a little bit, if you will, for those, again, who may not have had the opportunity to read the book. Briefly touch on Howard University, Shaw neighborhood. I know when I go there and I see the Whole Foods, you know what time it is. When you see the Starbucks and the Whole Food, you know what time it is. And so talk a little bit about that, because Kansas City, we are beginning to get more in that challenge as we look to push out some of our longstanding residents African Americans particularly, and folk are coming in and reclaiming what was once devalued land, if you will.
Now, there was a couple things going on here in DC. One, home ownership rates have declined precipitously, particularly after 2008, just like a lot of places in the country. And in addition, you had a rapid increase in the white population moving into the city. Also, Black people have moved out to the suburbs as well. But the DC, if you're not really familiar, go-go is the distinct sound of Washington, D.C. Now, there was a Metro PCS store that for about 20 years, they played music outside of the store using speakers. So you walk by this store on the corner in the Shaw neighborhood, you would hear go-go music playing from that store. Now, a few years ago, they developed a high-rise apartment called the Shy, and it's mainly populated by upwardly mobile white residents. Now, at some point, the white residents started to complain about the music. Now, mind you, this is an asset that that's been there for more than 20 years. It's obviously a good business. If you're in business for more than 20 years and in DC during a time of transition, you're a solid business. You want that business there. So there's something good about this business. In addition, a lot of people move to DC because of culture. You get to feel a Black majority area. You see the murals, you hear the music, you taste the food. That's why people go. But eventually the folks wanted to erase the music. And what happened is that they called the CEO of Metro PCS at the time, and they actually got them to shut down the music. The community erupted and mobilized. They rallied behind the hashtag Don't Mute DC. There were marches all throughout the street. Eventually, the CEO called and said you could play the music again. But what's interesting about this, the Don't Mute DC hashtag picked up again. It picks up again whenever there is any kind of trouble. And so it's an example of how communities can use their cultural assets that's devalued by the larger community, but we can flip it in ways to push back against that devaluation. And so a lot of places want our labor. They want us to work in the buildings. They want us to work, but they don't want us to be neighbors. And so my issue is clear. We should have diverse, integrated communities, particularly in the cities. It does not have to be when white folks move in, we're going to erase all the culture of it in order for us to thrive, because what you're really doing is erasing people. And so I'll leave it there, but it's a great example of how an asset, a cultural asset, was devalued, but then people picked it up and pushed back.
And Dr. Perry, for some of our listeners who may not know exactly what go-go music is, would it be fair to say that the most popular go-go beat is EU and Doing the Butt?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's the most popular. Chuck Brown is sort of the godfather of go-go, and it's this percussion-driven funk that you got to listen to. You got to listen to high energy, and but it's DC. It's DC. When you come to DC, you hear go-go.
It's DC all day long and has been for the past 20 some odd years.
More than that. I mean, you're going back 70s. You know,
yes,
but
you're right.
Yeah.
A couple of questions here. I'm gonna try to throw in a couple. So one is, how does an individual living in the area receive direct capital based on your experience?
They don't get enough direct capital. One of the things I'm working on is figuring out federal legislation to make sure that we find ways to get low interest home loans, low interest business loans, tax credits to folks in particular areas. There's ways we can do it, but it's clear that we're going to need federal assistance on this, that philanthropy can only do so much. City governments can do some, and you do see some programs here and there, but eventually the federal government has to kick in. So this is one of those things where I hope that there are initiatives in Kansas City that we can identify to pick up and get to a scale that could be considered demonstrations. But again, they're demonstrations waiting for the federal government to kick in to scale up.
Another question. So, Dr. Perry, as you know, probably back in late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, foundations, and we have some strong foundations as evidenced by, the Kauffman Foundation's leadership tonight and bringing you here for this informative conversation. But the foundations here, and we have, some of the strongest foundations in the country here, those foundations did what's called PRI loans, or program-related investments, administered by the foundations as possible ways to help with projects in communities of color to foster, work programs, to help with cultural investments as well. And to my knowledge, I am not aware of any PRI that's been done in Kansas City in a long time, and I very well could be wrong. Your thoughts on PRIs, and could they be possibly be an answer?
I mean, yes, they are an answer, and again, I'll repeat this, that eventually philanthropy can't do it alone. That we're not going to nonprofit our way out of these problems. We ultimately need the federal government to kick in. We need corporations to kick in. We need states to kick in. Philanthropy, corporate and nonprofit philanthropy, they've stepped up over the last 5-6 months, from COVID to the racial unrest. You've seen the philanthropic community really step up. And it's the first time I've ever seen them lead in a way that the federal government has to catch up, but the federal government does have to catch up. And so I think things you can do on the local level that can show evidence of growth and improvement, those are the things you should be trying, but to attach a policy component so that the state or the federal government can eventually support those efforts.
Great. And then I'm going to ask a question, as we heard so often during the election regarding opportunity zones, and Kansas City spent a fair amount of time in looking at what could be with opportunity zones. And I will keep my own thoughts to myself, but I'd love to get your thoughts on opportunity zones, their effectiveness. I can tell you here in Kansas City, we haven't had a whole lot of success and a lot of development that's occurred in those. And I think that we have a ton of them, to be very frank with you. And so, I heard President Trump talk about and touted opportunity zones with regards to African-American communities, which opportunity zones aren't solely for African-American communities, but that's a side issue. So I'd like to get your, thoughts on opportunity zones, and your take on them.
Yeah, but this goes back to what I was saying. You invest in place and not people, you eventually get push out. And creating tax incentives for very wealthy people to invest in some of these infrastructure projects may not necessarily will not probably lead to a change in the wealth numbers that are currently exist. And I just want to put this in perspective. Now, the Black family median wealth is about 17,000. The white family median wealth is about 170,000. So 10 times different. So every program that you initiate that can hopefully change those numbers, you really want regulations that demand that people are hired, that certain fund managers are selected, that there's certain projects to benefit Black communities are enacted. And there's right now, the regulations aren't there. And so I worry that if we don't correct this, we'll essentially worsen the problem of the wealth gap, of push of displacement and gentrification with opportunity zones.
Great. Reading some more audience questions as I'm trying to keep an eye on our time. So does your research show any difference in devaluation of Black properties in cities with Black leadership?
We have not looked at that. Now, and I have to say that it's in the metro area, so entire metro areas. And so, no, we didn't look at that. I think in just eyeballing it, I don't think that will be a difference maker, because so much of the reasons why you have the devaluation is occurring at either state, national issues, some local. But we did not look at that, but I don't think it would change the number pretty much.
Gotcha. What asset building programs are most effective in closing the wealth gap? I think that's a right on time question.
Oh man, know that the people who do own significant amounts of wealth, meaning they actually own a lot more things than they have debts for. So it's in business and housing. And if we're not increasing the percentage of employer firms, meaning businesses with at least 2 employees, and if we're not improving home ownership numbers, then we're really not trying to close any kind of wealth gap. And then on top of that, you need some kind of stimulus just from discrimination. After 3 weeks of being socially distanced, in some cases, you heard businesses going, we need federal relief. We need some type of federal intervention. Try being socially distanced for generations. What does stimulus look like then? And so for me, we got to talk about housing. We got to talk about business. But we also need to talk about stimulus. You need some kind of stimulus package, spending package to accelerate growth in Black neighborhoods.
So we've kind of covered a wide range of topics. Let me ask you this question, and I'm sure you've been asked before. So your book was pretty thorough and profound, and I felt like I was back in school again and having to refer back to the footnotes. What should you have put in the book that you left?
Oh man, I have so much work on business stuff. We did a study where we scraped all the Yelp data from business around the country, and it wasn't completed before the book was essentially, you turn it in and months before it's published. So I really wanted to publish this data on business stuff where we showed that businesses in Black neighborhoods actually score higher on Yelp, but they get less revenue. They score higher on Yelp. But as the concentration of Blackness in the neighborhood increases, the revenue decreases. So it's just like in housing. And our elders used to say, our ice is just as cold.
Absolutely.
That was the this a saying you heard readily in Black neighborhoods. And they knew, the elders knew, that if you bypass quality in the hood, you essentially force high quality businesses to work with low quality businesses or compete against low quality businesses. And you suppress the market in which you're just not adding revenue to it. And so we constantly have to remember our ice is just as cold. This is not a problem of quality in homes and businesses. This is a problem about investment. So we need greater investment, not programs and initiatives that build up financial literacy and all these other things. We need direct investment, cut the check. That's how you get growth in Black cities, by cutting the check.
And who needs to cut that check? And I think you kind of touched on a little bit, it's
Yeah, it needs to come from the federal government. I'm a big proponent of reparations. It needs to come in the form of from the federal government in terms of housing assistance. Remember, we got out of the Depression by giving people in their hand low interest loans, down payment assistance. We just didn't do it for Black people. And that led to this wealth divide we have today. So the same things we've done in the past, we can do now. And on top of that, business loans, we should be doing that. There's other ways to get capital to people. Debt forgiveness in certain areas. So, removing hospital debt, removing student loan debt. These are things that are throttling economic activity and growth among Black people. So there's ways to get direct capital on people. And we've done it before. We just have not done it for Black people. And I will go off a little bit. It's amazing how we simply just don't trust Black people with money. It's amazing. I don't care if it's school board leaders. I don't care if it's developers, if your banks. There's a lack of trust in Black people holding money. And it's illogical, it's wrong, and it's really hurting our ability to find real solutions to these wealth divides.
So I'm going to hit you with this. As we know, the Kauffman Foundation is supporting this. But, there's been, especially in light of, what went on this summer with the civil unrest, and there's been an outpouring of resources toward those organizations that are dealing with Black causes, but not as much money goes to those organizations that are Black-led, whether it's, government, whether it's philanthropy. Talk a little bit about this whole conversation that is all over the place regarding philanthropic redlining.
People like to say that Black people are getting all these resources, and look at the attention Black people are getting. But when you look at the dollars, they're not coming to Black people. They're not going to Black-led organizations. And this is why we really do need to have goals set, business goals set, where we say we're going to invest in these types of businesses, in these types of sectors. We're going to make sure that we increase the number of qualified suppliers so that we can have more governments work with suppliers who contract with people who happen to be Black, Latino, Asian, women, that we need to set new bars on that, new standards on that. Because what ends up happening is that because we see Black people as problems, we essentially invest in white people to fix them. And you see this all the time. Like I say that education is littered with white saviors for that reason, that we're constantly giving money to white people to fix Black people, when all Black people need is the investment. Nothing grows without investment. And so if we really want to see growth, we should be investing in the people who've been damaged by historic discrimination. And that's Black, brown, and Asian folk in this country. And we do need to repair that damage. And again, I say this all the time. It's not taking money out of your pocket by supporting Black businesses in this way, that you're actually figuring out ways to increase the pie, to grow the economy. And when you grow the economy, you have more resources to do different things. So if we want to grow the economy, if we want to improve quality of life for all residents, we've got to invest in Black and brown and Asian folks in our communities. Have to.
Dr. Perry, I'm going to ask you this. So as we are in the process of President-elect Biden with his transition team, what are the 3 things you would tell his newly named chief of staff that he needs to be concentrating on when it comes to Black communities?
I would say, without question, COVID, housing, business development. That would be my top 3. You know, the disproportionate amount of death is largely the sum of the pre-existing condition of racism in our communities. Housing discrimination, job discrimination, folks don't have health care, folks have to work in the retail sector, folks have to work in the healthcare industries. It's driving numbers up and death up. So we need a solution for COVID. Now, a solution for COVID, this is not a vaccine. It also means that when we develop strategies to hire contact workers, that we hire local communities instead of giving a big statewide contract to a firm, making sure that we work with local communities to do that. It means that we should be investing in Black-led CDFIs when we are creating the next CARES package, or making sure that we work with Black banks or financial institutions that serve Black people, prioritize those. So the coronavirus response can actually be multifaceted in its approach, but you got to deal with the disproportionate amount of death. Housing, and this is related to COVID, the social distancing efforts are forcing evictions, forcing closures, people losing their homes, foreclosures. And because of our lack of wealth over historically, we don't have anything to lean on when times get hard. So most people, if they an economic shock happens, they can lean on their saving, they can lean on the equity in their home, they can lean on their 401k. These are things that Black people don't have as much of in proportion. So what do? We take out, we use our credit cards, and then that just puts us in a downward spiral. And so we got to address this housing issue that is critical. And then in business, I mean, the CARES Act rolled out the PPP loans, and 95% of Black businesses did not get that subsidy. Now, businesses are absolutely vital to neighborhood development and growth. So we need to figure out ways to get capital to businesses. And this is what corporate America has figured out. Corporate America understands that we're going to give out money to small businesses, but again, that's going to run out soon. The idea that corporate America has this huge heart and they're going to do these charitable things, that's going to end very soon. It might have already ended. Again, government needs to pick it up, but you got to do some business development. So those would be my top three: COVID, housing, and business.
And Dr. Perry, it's hard for Black businesses to go and get the PPP loan when, let me just say, in Kansas City, there are so few banks in the Black community.
Yeah.
Because as I was hearing more and more Black businesses talk about how many banks are saying, if you weren't a customer, then we can't help you. Well, it's hard for me to be a customer when you're not in my community and I'm not able to build that rapport. So all that goes into what you're saying. And then finally, I'm going to read a final question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for final remarks, because I know you've had a very, very, very long day. And thank you so much for your time. Final question: how should organizations and local government in urban core communities who are involved in economic and community development reform their practices to intentionally invest in Black communities?
They can read my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, one. But I should have saved this for the final. Always, anybody can reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram. My handle is Andre Perry EDU. But one of the things I say is that you need conversations like this, and you need to identify the assets that are worthy of investment. One of the reasons why I was excited that they invited you to be the moderator is because you're the kind of person we need to invest in. If we're not investing in Emmet Pierson Jr., then we're truly not getting this point. We have people doing everything required to help their communities, to help their families, to help the city. And they're not getting the kind of investment they deserve. Now, clearly you're doing good work, you're working in a great organization, you're doing good things. We need more. We flatly need more. So, and you're not the only one. There are others in Kansas City. There are other projects that we need to invest in. And it's not daring to say, but it's clear that if some of the people who are doing this good work happen to be white, they would be getting more investment. And so for me, I don't talk about charity at all. I uplift assets because I say this is an investment strategy. Banking on Emmet is banking on Kansas City. And it's not helping a Black person. It's not helping a Black neighborhood. While that may happen, this is about an investment in Kansas City, the region. And so we need to get that straight, that there are assets in Black neighborhoods, Black communities, Black people who, if we invested in, the city would improve. And so that's what I recommend, to have a systematic way to identify assets in business, housing, education, politics, all the things I talk about in the book, and identify those people and invest in them, and change will happen. Change will happen.
Well, I thank you for your so very kind words. And there are so many others in Kansas City that are doing phenomenal work. To all of my CDC brethren and sisterin, I think you too lift them up as you lifted me and Community Builders of Kansas City up so well. So now when you come back, we're going to get down into this nitty gritty of this development thing with appraisals and how it's hard. I mean, you kind of touched on it, but how it's hard to get financing and we can't grow. But I promised I'd be on my best behavior tonight. So with that, thank you so much. Any last words in closing?
Yeah, I just think that this is a new day, and you got to get on this equity train. You have to. We can continue to cut our nose to spite our face, so to speak, and deny ourselves the economic growth that everyone's longing for. If we only learn to trust Black people and invest in Black people, growth will come. And people, about half the country said, no, we're not ready. But the other half said, we are. I need that half to go all in. I really do. Because we can deny racism for another 400 years, or we can set a new trajectory for the world. And it starts at the local level. It starts in places like Kansas City. But I'm going to need for people to get on the train. I mean, I hope in the care package I receive, I get my little whistle, my train whistle, or I need to send that to you and say, whoop, whoop, get on the train. The train is about to go. It's about to go. Sherman is in the engine. He's about to pull off. I told y'all to get on. Because if you don't, it's going to pass you by. And, we're ready. We're ready. And I want folks to get on. So I'm going to close and leave it there.
Well, thank you so much. The care package, like I said, it has the quarterback's jersey. It also, has a Kansas City Monarchs hat to celebrate our fantastic museums here, the Negro League, as well as the Jazz Museum. So something in there from both of those. Of course, we have barbecue sauce because this is the barbecue capital of the world. You can't get a good barbecue in DC.
You're right about that.
Yeah, no, you can't get a good barbecue in DC. So again, you've got to come back. You are always welcome to come out and hang out and drop knowledge on us. And so with that, I think I'll turn it over to Sherman for any closing remarks and closing words. And thank you so much, Dr. Perry.
Just want to say thank you to you, Emmet, as well as you, Dr. Perry, for joining us tonight. It's people's bedtime. I'm gonna let everybody go. We'll have you back, Dr. Perry, I promise. Thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. I think 600 people saw Dr. Perry speak today in some form or fashion in Kansas City. So you're a big hit, so we gotta have you back. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone. Dr. Perry, best wishes, best and healthy wishes to you.
Bye-bye. Take care. Same to you.
All righty. Bye-bye.